Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Dawnstar Conspiracy, a LitRPG progression fantasy series, by Eric Walsh, narrated by Kevin T. Collins. Chapter 1. Nate wandered the pristine halls of the Immortal Palace, his heart heavy with regret. After days trekking through rifts, each more dangerous than the last, this should have been the site of his greatest triumph. Instead, it stood as a monument to his everlasting shame. The clangor of battle resounded behind a closed door to his left, and he quickened his pace. Although the parlor's occupants sounded busy enough, he'd rather not risk running into them, having long since grown weary of ham-fisted attempts to pump him for information. Hundreds of Virists had flocked here once word of his adventure had gotten out, eager to pick up the Lord Protector's trail for the remaining bounty or farm essence from master-level Virabeasts. And every single one of them seemed to think he held the key to their success, as if being the last person to limp away from the insane immortal alive somehow qualified him to dole out advice. Soon he'd passed beyond the muffled shouts and eruptions of essence. His mind drifted to his own pitched battle against the enchanted clarinet almost a year ago. The Virabeast had taken advantage of his weak resolve to bewitch him into attacking his comrades. Only Ellie and Vince's quick thinking had saved them from complete disaster. At the time, he'd been embarrassed by his failure and determined to do better. A hero's will shouldn't break so easily. A hero stood strong, unyielding, against whatever his opponents threw at him. Of course, a hero also didn't get his friends killed. He stumbled, realizing belatedly that his feet had carried him to the tiered theater where they'd once confronted the Lord Protector. Thankfully, it stood empty of amateur bounty hunters for the time being. He regained his footing on the stairs and descended until he stood before the wooden stage. The sector's ambient essence had long since restored the shattered stage and disintegrated seats left in the wake of the Immortal's duel with the Guardian of the Forest, sweeping away the refuse as neatly as Ellie's beheaded corpse. If only he could erase his memories so easily. Mounting the stage, he strode to the grand piano at its center. Its keys glistened in the light. He ran a finger across the smooth ivory, the Lord Protector's voice echoing in his head. And though sun may shift to rising dark, though beauty may turn gray and stark, though dawn may dawn without a lark, the gold tree yet blooms in the glen. He slammed a hand against the keys, suddenly furious. The harsh cacophony of notes rose to join the mournful dirge, looping repeatedly through his head. In the countless times he'd returned here since Ellie's death, the sector's background music had never changed. Perhaps, like his guide, it recognized how broken he was. Bowing his head, he allowed the memories that haunted him most to surface. They flicked before him like slides in a PowerPoint presentation. Ellie, studying the waving grass in the Great Plains with open-eyed wonder. Ellie, snuggled next to him in their makeshift igloo in the flurrying chasms as he regaled her with tales of his past deeds. Ellie, propped on her imagined bed in the dreamlands, confessing her hopes and fears while prying the same from him. You don't earn happiness. You decide to let it in. That's what she'd told him in that sector of shifting backdrops, where believing in something with enough conviction made it real. Yet, how could he ever embrace happiness after what he'd done? He didn't deserve to be happy, not so long as the Lord Protector drew breath and Ellie didn't. She'd stood with him to the end, believed in him, even when no one else would. And look what it had gotten her. His hand went to the spell gem he kept clipped to his belt. Someday he'd hunt down the Nil-Eater who'd stolen Ellie from him and make him pay. He might never be a real hero, but he could at least finish what they'd started, even if his journey took him to the Null and back.
"I thought I'd find you here."
The familiar voice jerked him out of his reverie. He glanced over to see Vince leaning against the side of the piano. The Space Weaver had lost some of his paunch and gained a few more worry lines etched into his brow since the last time Nate had seen him, but his heavy overcoat and twinkling blue eyes remained the same, as did his carefree grin.
"I suppose if you're going to mope, you could pick a worse place to do it. At least here you've got a soundtrack to your misery."
Nate shrugged, too numb to summon more than a twinge of annoyance at the comment. "I come here sometimes to think." His fingers brushed the spell gem at his waist. "To remind myself why I'm still fighting."
"To punish yourself for not having won already, you mean? It's been over 10 months, Nate. Don't you think you've beaten yourself up long enough?"
He didn't reply, and Vince sighed.
"We all made mistakes that day, lad. We just gotta learn to live with them and move on, best we can."
"I'll move on as soon as I've tossed the Lord Protector's head at the Patriarch's feet."
"Aye, of course you will."
Vince glanced pointedly around the empty stage.
"And how's that going for you?"
A spark of anger flickered past Nate's numbness. "As well as your own hopeless search for the lost, I'd wager."
"The lost," Vince mused aloud. "A fitting name for those who have vanished at the Lord Protector's hand, but to call something lost implies it can be found, so long as we remain willing to look."
Nate shifted away from the piano, turning his back on Vince and pacing toward the edge of the stage. "What do you want, Vince? Or are you just here to torment me?"
"Torment you? Nah, I think you do a good enough job of that all on your own. I'm here with a proposal."
He continued to pace while avoiding looking toward the obnoxious Space Weaver. "What kind of proposal? As I recall, the last time we tried working together didn't turn out so well."
"Our approaches differed, I'll grant you that. But things have changed. I finally have a solid lead."
That got Nate's attention. He whirled to face Vince and took an involuntary step forward. "You have a lead on the Lord Protector?" Vince shook his head, his gray ponytail flapping.
"Not on him, no. But I have a contact who swears they saw one of the lost not 3 days ago. Alive."
Alive. The word echoed in his mind like a private prayer. "Who?" His voice came out hoarse and desperate. Vince's expression softened.
"Not Ellie. It's someone else from your old guild, though. A woman named Sandra."
He remembered the Time Weaver well, with her ageless face and porcelain beauty. She'd been among those in Wes's group slain in the Immortal Palace. If she still lived, then that meant... No. He quickly stifled the seed of hope blooming in his gut. He'd reached too many dead ends, faced too many disappointments during his search already. He didn't know if he could survive another. "The lost are dead," he replied, keeping his voice firm. "I watched the Lord Protector incinerate Ellie with my own eyes."
"You have no idea what you saw. No. You said even the headmistress couldn't make sense of what happened. For all we know, the Lord Protector created a spatial distortion, or used some type of advanced soul weaving.
Nate sighed wearily. That's wishful thinking, and you know it. No one wants Ellie to be alive more than I do, but we have to face reality.
Really? Because it seems to me like you're the one in denial. Are you so obsessed with punishing yourself that you'd rather wallow here than seize a second chance when it's offered?
What second chance? He scoffed. Flames curled around his fingers as they tightened into fists. We've been down this same road before, and I won't do it again. Your contact must have imagined it. Or maybe they're making it up, I don't know. Either way, I won't be party to another wild goose chase. I won't let myself hope, only to be let down and suffer through the pain of losing her all over again. Vince threw his hands up.
What happened to the Nate who insisted Ellie had to be alive out there? The Nate that dragged me halfway across the Nexus on a feeling?
Nate hunched his shoulders, clenching his jaw. He realized that wishing for something doesn't make it so. Not all mistakes can be undone. Not all wrongs can be righted.
Aye, but maybe this one can. For Source's sake, Nate. Snap out of it. What would the old you do if he were here? Source, what would Ellie want you to do?
He winced as if Vince had slapped him. The thought of Ellie's condemnation filled him with fresh shame. She hadn't allowed being a binder to hold her back, no matter how hopeless her quest had seemed. She'd never have given up. Maybe I'm just not as strong as her, he whispered, bowing his head. He loathed the self-pity echoing in his voice. Maybe I don't have it left in me to fight anymore. Vince stayed silent for so long, Nate thought he might have left. Finally, the older man let out a frustrated growl.
Or maybe what you need is to get out there and do something. Even if you fail, at least then you'll know you tried.
You're wasting your time. Nate turned away, squeezing his arms tightly across his chest. If you want to speak with your contact, I wish you the best of luck. But I'm staying here.
And if I refuse to leave you alone, what will the great Vera Beast Slayer do then? Cry all over me?
Vince's words might be teasing, but they still tore at his heart, reminding him of the hero he'd once longed to be. That person had died when Ellie did. It had just taken him a while to realize it. Go home, Vince. Please. Vince crossed his arms and smirked.
Tell you what, I'll make you a deal. Beat me in a duel, fair and square, and I'll leave you here to feel sorry for yourself in peace.
A flicker of something stirred in his belly, but he shoved it down and narrowed his eyes. You want me to fight you?
Why not? It's not like you've got anything better to do.
Harsh, but full of bitter truth. And if I lose?
Then you return with me to Tabula Rasa.
He gave Vince a skeptical look, and the other man rolled his eyes. The gesture reminded him of Ellie, making him wince. How often had he seen that same expression on her laughing face?
I'm not forcing you to commit to the entire mission, Vince continued, oblivious to his heartache. All I ask is that you hear my contact out.
His grin resurfaced.
Besides, that's only if you lose. Or do you expect to be bested by a space weaver with no direct combat weaves?
That earlier feeling roiled again in his chest, and he realized what it was. Excitement. Despite everything that had happened, some part of him still relished the thrill of the fight. Fine, he grumbled before he could think better of it. Thermal essence coursed from his right hand, shaping itself into a crackling ice blade. If that's what it takes to convince you to leave me alone, then so be it. Let's get this over with. Chapter 2. Holding his ice blade aloft, Nate charged. He crossed the stage in a matter of seconds, thrusting the frozen spear at Vince's chest. Vince blinked out of existence before it could connect, and Nate's weave passed harmlessly through where he'd been. The Space Weaver reappeared a moment later in the opposite corner of the stage. He shook his head sadly, feigning a yawn.
Really, Nate? Is that the best you can do? I expected to at least have to break a sweat.
Nate tightened his jaw. If Vince had been trying to rile him up, it had worked. Cursing the loss of his gusting boots, he still hadn't found any binder capable of repairing the precursor relic since he'd overloaded them fighting the Lord Protector. He charged across the stage once more. This time he brandished his ice blade in one hand while conjuring a firebolt in the other. Right before he reached Vince, he released his fiery missile, following up the distraction with a strike from his spear. Unfortunately, the Space Weaver had clearly been expecting the maneuver. Vince ducked beneath the projectile and allowed the ice blade to pass through him as his body became temporarily incorporeal. Grinning at Nate, he gave a little wave and vanished. His hasty retreat might be mostly random, but with so much open space around them, it would almost always send him beyond Nate's reach. It took him a moment to find Vince again, now standing in the second row of seats. The other man held his hands up, still grinning.
Whoa there, Slayer. Take it easy, or I might start to think there's some fire left in you after all. I'm getting flashbacks to our fight against that enchanted clarinet, and I'm not eager to relive those particular memories.
Nate's fingers tightened on the hilt of his ice blade. Then you shouldn't have forced me into this stupid duel. The clarinet had me under a compulsion back then. I didn't have a choice. This time, I'm going to enjoy every second of kicking the nil out of you. Vince laughed.
Now that's the Nate I remember.
He beckoned mockingly with one hand.
Bring it on, unless you're ready to throw in the towel already.
Unable to hold back a feral grin, Nate rushed to the edge of the stage. Just as his feet found empty air, he poured essence into his new feather belt. The relic responded with a burst of kinetic energy that lessened the weight of gravity upon him. While the end effect wasn't as dramatic as his old gusting boots, it nevertheless sent him soaring through the air. He swept his blade beneath him in a wide arc, but Vince had already blinked away. With a mental command to his belt, he shifted gravity to arrest his fall and hover in midair. From his higher vantage point, he swept his gaze across the theater until he spied Vince amid an upper row of seats. An infusion of Vera hastened the spell forming in his hand, and the quick firebolt seared through the air in an instant. Vince shouted a curse and barely dove to the side in time, stumbling against a seat. Savage triumph thrummed through him. Vince had once told him he couldn't use hasty retreat too often in quick succession without taking a moment to reorient himself. Nate didn't give it to him. Even as Vince dodged, he had a second firebolt prepared. This one, however, he infused with Vera to disguise the flames until they became practically transparent. The deceptive firebolt caught Vince off guard, hitting him in the shoulder and spinning him around. It probably hadn't done much through the stronger Verist's aegis, but it should have at least burned a few of his Vera. Time to deliver a finishing blow. Strengthening his ice blade with as much Vera as he could, he adjusted his gravity with a thread of essence to his feather belt. He'd almost exhausted the item's magic, but there should be enough left for one last maneuver. His arrested movement shifted into a graceful glide with the tip of his frozen spear aimed down at Vince's chest. Before the mighty ice blade could connect, however, Vince detached a small golden rod from his belt and pointed it at him. A thin bolt of lightning cracked the air. Electricity surged over Nate, his muscles seizing. He lost control over his belt and crashed to the theater below. By the time he'd thrown off the brief paralysis and extricated himself from the broken remnants of a chair, Vince had vanished. He took a moment to check his reserve while searching for the missing Space Weaver. Of his original 30 Vera, he was down to 22 after his infusions and whatever Vince had just shot at him. When had he picked up an offensive relic? What other tricks might the Space Weaver have up his sleeve? Despite himself, he relished this fight more than he'd expected, not only because of his pent-up frustration with Vince and the satisfaction he'd get from taking the man down a peg or two. He'd forgotten how this felt. The rush of adrenaline, the pride of victory, the joy of doing something at which he excelled. When was the last time he'd been in a proper fight against a worthy opponent? His hunt for the Lord Protector and his search for the lost with Vince before that had taken him to plenty of dangerous locations, but he remembered little from those missions now besides bitter disappointment. Sweeping his gaze around the room, he realized the sector's music had shifted for him. Gone was his typical dirge, replaced by a roaring battle anthem replete with drums and horns. Perhaps Vince had a point after all, not that he'd ever admit it to the arrogant nil-eater. He returned his focus to the fight at hand. His foe had been out of sight too long to have simply repositioned with another hasty retreat. Suddenly wary, he extended his senses around him as best as his meager insight allowed, searching for any active weaves. The wily Space Weaver must have activated his coat of vanishing to go invisible. "I know you're there, Vince." He stepped carefully through the aisle of seats, keeping his senses peeled. "Show yourself so we can finish this, or are you too much a coward to face me?" His foot jerked to the side without warning, and he stumbled, catching himself on a seat back. As he pushed up, something yanked on his mighty ice blade. It skittered out of his grasp, clattering to the floor and dissolving into its raw essence. The null take Vince and his blasted shift spell. It might only be capable of moving its target a short distance, but that didn't make it any less infuriating. Another shift tugged at his leg. Enough was enough. Flaring his essence, he activated his other new item, a resolute torque that hung around his neck. Unlike his circlet of agility's small but continuous boost, he could activate the resolute torque for a substantial bonus to his resolve for a few minutes. That might be exactly what he needed to resist Vince's antics. More magic tried to shove him off balance, but this time he had the mental fortitude to shrug off the effect. "You're going to have to do better than that," his taunt rang out across the theater, echoing back from the distant walls. "Or do you not actually care about winning this little—" Lightning split the air. He barely ducked to the side in time to evade it. Another blast followed the first, and he burned a Vera to conjure a quick frost shield between him and the attack. Electricity sparked harmlessly against the ice. Nate scanned the higher tiers of seats for the source of the weaves. There! Shifting his frost shield to intercept another jolt, he launched his own firebolt toward its point of origin. Flames exploded against a wooden seat, quickly setting it ablaze. But still, no sign of Vince. He ground his teeth. The Space Weaver had to be staying on the move, taking advantage of Nate's poor insight and the size of their arena to keep him at bay. But Vince's invisibility wouldn't last forever. Eventually, the binding would run out of juice. All Nate had to do was wait him out. Moving to stand near the front, he assumed a defensive posture. With the stage at his back, he only had to watch one direction. He repositioned his frost shield to deflect several more lightning bolts, while Vince simultaneously tried to throw him off balance with shifts. It took all his concentration to weather the assault, especially when the boost from his resolute torque faded. He longed for the chance to strike back against the null-cursed Space Weaver, yet the few firebolts he slipped in between blocks did little but obliterate more of the seating. Finally, the barrage ceased. He eyed the theater warily, wondering what new trick Vince had prepared for him now. When nothing happened, he allowed himself to relax a hair. Perhaps Vince's lightning relic had run out of charges, or his invisibility had faded and he'd hid. Keeping his frost shield at the ready and his limited senses strained, he crept forward, a hand to his side, weaves of frozen essence coalescing into a new ice blade in the shape of his favored sword. Come out, wherever you are." Vince, of course, didn't answer. He'd almost reached the middle of the front row, where the seats split around the stairs, when something leaped out at him. He reacted instantly, cleaving his sword down only to feel it tugged a hair off course. Instead of striking his target, the blade caught on the wooden back of the seat. He tried to yank it free, but something jerked him off his feet. Losing his grip on the sword, he slammed into the ground with a pained yelp. Glancing down, he saw an animated rope coiling around his legs from his ankles up to his knees. Null! Just how many new items had Vince picked up since they'd parted ways? He shaped Essence into an ice blade to hack at the rope, but an electric bolt sizzled across his back. His half-formed sword dropped from his twitching fingers. Vince wavered into existence beside him. With his body racked by temporary paralysis, Nate could do little more than glare. Vince gave him a wide grin. "Glad to see that finally shut you up. Perhaps now we can discuss my reward." The animated rope coiled over Nate's arms, pinning them to his sides. Still, he was far from helpless. As the stunning effect faded, he poured 3 Vera into a quick firebolt. The infused spell caught Vince by surprise and sent him stumbling back with a pained cry. Nate strained against his bonds. His raw strength should have been enough to tear simple fiber, but whatever this relic was, it consisted of sterner material. No matter how much he flexed, the rope wouldn't budge. Essence pooled around his hand, and he shaped it into a frozen knife. Perhaps he could at least manage enough leverage to cut his bonds away. At that moment, a loud groan reverberated above him. He glanced up, and his eyes widened. The grand piano from center stage teetered on the stage's edge, right above where he lay. Vince must have gradually used shift to reposition it while they fought, a couple of inches at a time. Caught up as he'd been in the action, he hadn't even noticed. Desperately conjuring a frost shield above him, he poured Vera into the weave to reinforce it. The roaring battle music that had accompanied him for the duration of the fight quieted, replaced by a single trombone that offered a mocking womp, womp, womp. Then the piano fell. His mighty frost shield dissipated some of the blow, and his aegis absorbed most of the rest. Even so, he doubted being crushed by a piano was ever a pleasant experience. Pain exploded all across his body, the weight of the instrument pinning him to the ground and making it difficult to breathe. "Point, set, match." He looked up with watering eyes and found Vince standing over him, his expression commiserating. "I know you're still hurting over what happened to Ellie. Source. I am too, but only you can fix whatever's broken inside you." The older man held out a hand. The rope uncoiled itself from Nate and slithered across the floor. With another flick of his wrist, he shifted the piano to the side. Nate gasped in air as the worst of the pressure left his chest.
I won't hold you to our agreement, he continued. If you're in, I want it to be your choice. But if there's still anything of the old Nate in there, come find me by the sector's entrance.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?